Every daughter on this list was given something most people never stop being grateful for. Parents who paid attention, a family that showed up, a home that was safe. Some of them were given more than that. Private schools, comfortable houses, two parents who worked themselves to the bone to make sure their children had everything they needed. None of it was enough. These are daughters who were told no, about a boyfriend, about a secret life, about a pair of stolen pants, and whose response to that word was to make sure the person who said it could never say anything again. Some of them hired people to do it. Some of them picked up the weapon themselves. One of them was 12 years old. One of them wrote in her diary that it felt pretty enjoyable. Today we are covering 10 daughters who committed cold-blooded murder, and the sentences that followed when the courts finally caught up with them. Case 1. Carly Madison Gregg. On the afternoon of March 19, 2024, Ashley Smiley drove home from Northwest Rankin High School in Brandon, Mississippi, with her 14-year-old daughter Carly in the passenger seat. Ashley was a math teacher at the same school Carly attended. They had done this same drive together hundreds of times. By 4:15 that afternoon, Ashley was dead, shot 3 times in the head inside her own bedroom. The gun used was hers. The person who pulled the trigger was her daughter. This is the case of Carly Madison Gregg, a 14-year-old girl from Rankin County, Mississippi, who murdered her mother and attempted to murder her stepfather on the same afternoon, because a friend told her mother she had a vape pen. Carly was tried as an adult. In September 2024, a Rankin County jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence after just 2 hours of deliberation. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was 15 years old when the sentence was handed down. What makes this case different from almost every other case of a daughter who killed a parent is the footage. There is surveillance video of almost everything. The camera in the garage captured Carly and Ashley arriving home. The kitchen camera captured Carly walking through with a gun hidden behind her back. It captured the sound of 3 gunshots. It captured Carly walking back into the kitchen afterward, picking up her phone and texting her stepfather. The jury did not have to take anyone's word for what happened. They watched it. The question was never whether Carly did it. The question was why, and whether a 14-year-old who had never been in trouble before could truly be called a cold-blooded killer. The jury answered that question in 2 hours. Ashley Smiley was a devoted mother and a well-liked teacher. Her husband Heath was a physical therapist. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Brandon, and by all accounts their home was a normal one. What was happening inside Carly's life, behind the surface of that normal home, set everything in motion. Ashley Smiley was born on April 11, 1983, in Stuart, Florida. She eventually settled in Mississippi, where she built her career as a high school math teacher at Northwest Rankin High School. She married Heath Smiley, a physical therapist whose clinic was about 5 minutes from their home. Together they had a stable, ordinary life in Brandon. Ashley had Carly from a previous relationship. Carly's biological father, Kevin Gregg, had struggled with mental illness and drug use, and Ashley and Kevin had divorced amid that difficulty. Ashley raised Carly largely on her own before marrying Heath. By 2024, Carly was 14 years old and a 9th grade student at the same school where her mother taught. That detail mattered. Ashley saw Carly at home and at school. There was very little in Carly's day that Ashley was not close to. Carly had no prior criminal record, no history of violence. Teachers and classmates did not describe her as a problem student. But in the months before March 2024, things had begun to shift. Carly had started using marijuana and vaping. She had obtained burner phones, cheap prepaid phones that her mother did not know about. She kept these things hidden in her bedroom. She also had a close friend group at school, and it was one of those friends who made the decision that changed everything. That friend was worried enough about Carly's drug use that he went to Ashley Smiley and told her what was going on. On the morning of March 19, 2024, Ashley found out. She learned about the marijuana, the vape pens, and the burner phones. She and Carly were both at school that day when this happened. According to court testimony, Carly was described as grumpy and unfocused throughout the school day. She appeared distracted. She had what witnesses described as a memory blank at certain points. At 3:54 p.m, the garage camera captured mother and daughter arriving home together. At that moment, nothing about the footage looked unusual. They were just two people coming home from a long day. What Carly did in the 20 minutes that followed was not impulsive. It was a series of deliberate steps. Between 3:54 p.m. and approximately 4:14 p.m, Carly moved through the house with a purpose. The kitchen camera captured her walking toward her parents' bedroom. She had retrieved a .357 Magnum pistol from underneath her mother and stepfather's mattress. The gun belonged to Ashley. Carly carried it behind her back with one hand, moving carefully so that the shape of it would not be obvious to the cameras she knew were there. The footage does not show what happened inside the bedroom. There are no cameras in that room, but the audio is there. 3 gunshots, then screaming, then silence. Seconds after the shots, the kitchen camera picked up Carly walking back in. Her mother's 2 dogs circled her anxiously. Carly ignored them. She sat down, picked up her mother's phone, and typed a text message to Heath Smiley. The message read, "Are you almost home, honey?" Ashley Smiley was found with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. She did not survive. In the days before March 19th, there is no documented evidence that Carly had threatened her mother, physically confronted her, or given any outward sign of what she was planning. The trigger, according to prosecutors, was the discovery of the marijuana and the burner phones, the knowledge that her secret life was about to be exposed and that consequences were coming. Carly's solution to that problem was to make sure Ashley could not deliver those consequences. She also called a friend and asked them to come over, telling them there was an emergency. She was still in the house when Heath arrived home. When Heath Smiley pulled into the driveway and opened the front door, Carly shot him. The bullet struck him in the shoulder. Heath was wounded but conscious. He managed to call 911 from outside the house. His voice on that 911 call was played for the jury at trial. He told the dispatcher he had been shot and that his wife was inside. Law enforcement arrived quickly. Carly was taken into custody. Ashley's body was found in the bedroom with 3 gunshot wounds to the head. The .357 Magnum was recovered. During the investigation, prosecutors identified the sequence of events from the surveillance footage in precise detail. The footage was time-stamped and unambiguous. It showed Carly entering the bedroom with the gun. It showed her returning without it. It showed her calmly texting Heath. It showed her waiting. There was also the matter of what Carly was overheard saying in the immediate aftermath. The prosecutor at trial, Assistant District Attorney Catherine Newman, told the jury what Carly had said after shooting her mother. She said, "I put 3 in my mum, and I got 3 more waiting for my stepdad." That single statement became central to the prosecution's argument that this was not a mental health crisis, not a blackout, not an uncontrollable episode. It was a plan that Carly carried out in 2 stages, interrupted only by the time it took Heath to drive home from work. Forensic and physical evidence supported the prosecution's timeline entirely. Carly was charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and tampering with evidence. She was initially held at the Rankin County Juvenile Detention Center before being transferred to the Adult Detention Center after a judge approved charging her as an adult. The trial of State of Mississippi versus Carly Madison Gregg began on September 16, 2024, in Rankin County Circuit Court before Judge Dewey Arthur. It lasted 5 days. The courtroom was packed. The case had drawn national and international attention, partly because of Carly's age, partly because of the surveillance footage, and partly because of the fundamental question the defense raised. Was a 14-year-old capable of the kind of premeditated murder the prosecution was describing? The defense, led by attorney Bridget Todd, did not dispute that Carly had fired the gun. The defense never claimed someone else did it. Their argument was that Carly was in a state of severe mental illness at the time of the shooting, that she was suffering from dissociation, auditory hallucinations, and a reaction to a recently changed antidepressant medication. Todd asked the jury to find Carly not guilty by reason of insanity. Several mental health professionals testified. The defense's own expert, Dr. Andrew Clark, said he had diagnosed Carly with bipolar II disorder and that she had experienced dissociative episodes over a period of years. But he also acknowledged that he could not provide an objective finding that she was legally insane at the moment of the shooting. The prosecution's expert, Dr. Melissa Picard, testified directly that Carly did not meet Mississippi's legal standard for insanity at the time of the events. Picard stated that Carly knew the nature and quality of her actions and understood that what she was doing was wrong. Prosecutor Newman walked the jury through the footage step by step. She pointed to Carly hiding the gun behind her back on camera. She pointed to Carly texting Heath immediately after killing Ashley. She pointed to Carly waiting for Heath to arrive. She pointed to Carly shooting Heath when he opened the door. Then she played the audio of Heath's 911 call. Then she reminded the jury of what Carly had said. "I put 3 in my mum, and I got 3 more waiting for my stepdad." Heath Smiley testified in person. His presence in that courtroom, the man who had been shot in his own doorway by his stepdaughter, who had called 911 bleeding from his shoulder, and who had also lost his wife that afternoon, was one of the most significant moments of the trial. The jury of 12 Rankin County residents deliberated for 2 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on all 3 counts. After the guilty verdicts were read, the same jury was asked to deliberate on sentencing. They returned after a further period of deliberation and recommended life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, life in prison for the attempted murder charge to run concurrently, and 10 years for the tampering with evidence charge. Judge Arthur delivered the sentences. He had previously made efforts throughout the trial to ensure Carly understood the consequences she was facing, particularly when it came to a plea deal that had been offered before trial. Prosecutors had offered Carly a deal: plead guilty, serve 40 years, and the remaining charges would be dropped. Carly declined. The judge confirmed on the record that he had made certain Carly understood what rejecting that offer meant. She rejected it anyway. Rankin County District Attorney Bubba Bramlett spoke outside the courthouse after the verdict. He said, "Carly Gregg is evil, and that's not easy to say. But the truth of the matter is that sometimes evil comes in young packages." Ashley Smiley's family had waited through the entire trial to speak. The grief they carried into that courtroom was the grief of people who had lost a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman who had spent her career teaching teenagers the same age as the girl who killed her. Carly sobbed when the verdict was read. As of 2026, Carly Madison Gregg is being held at the Youthful Offender Unit of the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility in Rankin County. She is 16 years old. Her case is currently on appeal before the Mississippi Supreme Court. Her attorneys filed a 30-page brief in early 2026, arguing that the trial court made procedural errors related to mental health evaluations and sentencing options presented to the jury. A group called Carly's Warriors, run by people who believe the sentence is too harsh, has formed to advocate for her and stays in daily contact with her in prison. Heath Smiley survived the shooting. He lost his wife. He was shot in the doorway of the home he shared with her. He testified in the trial that convicted her daughter, and he has had to continue living with all of that. Ashley Smiley was 40 years old. She was a math teacher who drove her daughter to school every morning and home every afternoon. On the day she died, she had done nothing more than find out her daughter had a vape pen. She had not yet grounded Carly, had not yet taken her phone, had not yet decided what the consequence would be. She found out in the morning, drove home in the afternoon, and was shot in her own bedroom before the conversation even happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves another daughter who was told she could not see the person she loved, and whose answer to that boundary was even more calculated and left far more people dead. Case 2. Sarah Marie Johnson. On the morning of September 2nd, 2003, Alan and Diane Johnson were shot to death inside their home in Bellevue, Idaho. Alan was 46, Diane was 52. They had been together for 20 years. Their son Matthew was away at college. Their daughter Sarah was the only other person in the house. She was 16 years old. When police arrived, Sarah told them a stranger had broken in and killed her parents. That story lasted 6 weeks before it collapsed entirely. In February 2005, after a lengthy trial, a jury found Sarah Marie Johnson guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was 18 years old at sentencing. She has been behind bars ever since. The motive was straightforward. Sarah had a boyfriend her parents did not approve of. They told her she could not see him. 3 days after her father confronted that boyfriend directly and threatened to report him to police, both of Sarah's parents were dead, shot inside their own home in the early morning hours. What happened in the Johnson home that September is one of the clearest documented examples of what can happen when a teenager decides that the people standing in the way of what she wants are a problem to be removed rather than parents to be listened to. Alan and Diane Johnson had built a stable life in Bellevue, a small city in the Wood River Valley near the resort town of Sun Valley. Alan co-owned a landscaping company. Diane worked at a local medical clinic. They had been together since their early 20s, raised 2 children, and by the summer of 2003, their older child Matthew was at the University of Idaho. Their younger child Sarah was heading into her junior year at Wood River High School in nearby Haley. People who knew the family described them as close and grounded. Alan and Diane were not described as controlling or cruel parents. They were described as parents who paid attention. That quality, their attentiveness, is what put them in conflict with Sarah. In the summer of 2003, Sarah began dating a 19-year-old named Bruno Santos. Santos was a high school dropout who had entered the United States from Mexico without documentation and was involved in street-level drug dealing. Sarah was 16. Alan and Diane found out and immediately objected. They were worried about the age gap, his criminal involvement, and the fact that he was undocumented. Friends of Sarah's shared those concerns. One friend later said Santos was a dropout selling drugs, and that the relationship simply did not seem right. Sarah disagreed entirely. She believed Santos was the person she would spend her life with, and she defied her parents repeatedly, continuing to see him in secret. Over Labor Day weekend 2003, Alan and Diane discovered that Sarah had spent the night at Santos's apartment. Alan drove over, collected Sarah, and confronted Santos directly. He told Santos to stay away from his daughter. He also told him that if he did not end contact with Sarah, he would report him to police for having a sexual relationship with a minor. Alan did not act on that threat immediately. He never got the chance. 3 days later, he and his wife were dead, and the open loop between that confrontation and what Sarah did next is what the entire investigation eventually proved. In the days between Labor Day and the morning of September 2nd, the household was tense. Sarah was restricted. Her contact with Santos was cut off as much as her parents could manage. What she was thinking during those 3 days is not entirely known. What is known is what the physical evidence showed she did. The Johnson property had a separate guest house. A man named Alan Spiegel lived there and had gone on vacation, leaving behind a .264 caliber Winchester Model 70 bolt-action rifle. Sarah had a key to the guest house. At approximately 6:20 in the morning on September 2nd, she went there and took the rifle. What followed happened in a matter of minutes. Diane Johnson was shot once in the head while she lay in bed. Alan Johnson was shot twice in the chest as he came out of the shower. The bedroom door had been propped open with pillows, something the Johnsons did during hot nights to allow air to move through the house. The crime scene was described by Blaine County Sheriff Walt Femling as the most disturbing he had ever worked. There was blood on the carpet, on the walls, and on the ceiling. 2 large kitchen knives had been placed at the foot of Diane's body. Police could not immediately explain their placement and investigated whether it was gang-related. It was not. Investigators later concluded the knives had been staged. Sarah told police she had been asleep in her room when she heard the first shot. She said she ran toward her parents' room, but fled when she heard the second shot, then ran to a neighbour's house to call for help. That story changed across multiple interviews. In some versions, she said she heard arguing before the shots. In another, she said she went to her parents' doorway before running. The small inconsistencies accumulated, and investigators noted every one of them. As Sarah stood outside the house, watching her parents' bodies be removed, several people present noted her behaviour was unusual. The sheriff later said most 16-year-olds would not be standing on a fence, watching their parents come out in body bags. Sarah was calm. She was watching. Shortly after the murders, at a volleyball practice, Sarah leaned over to a friend and said, "Find Bruno and tell him I love him no matter what happens." Her friend said something inside her dropped when she heard those words. A garbage truck had made its rounds near the Johnson property on the morning of the murders. When investigators tracked it down, they found inside it a bloody bathrobe, a left-hand leather glove, and a right-hand latex glove. The gloves had come from Diane Johnson's SUV. The bathrobe was from the Johnson home. All 3 items contained DNA. A physical examination of Sarah on the day of the murders found linear bruising on her left shoulder, the kind of bruising consistent with the recoil from firing a bolt-action rifle. Sarah told examiners she had gotten the bruise over the weekend when she tripped over a coffee table at Santos's apartment. Santos himself was investigated. Forensic evidence was tested against him. Nothing matched. He was not connected to the crime scene in any way. Unidentified fingerprints found on the rifle scope and ammunition box were later matched to Christopher Hill, a friend of Spiegel's who had been at the property legitimately. Sarah's defense team later used Hill's fingerprints to argue that someone else could have been the shooter. Every court that examined that argument rejected it. 6 weeks passed between the murders and Sarah's arrest. In that time, the people around her watched a girl who did not grieve like someone who had lost both parents suddenly and violently. She went to hair and nail appointments. She wanted to play volleyball. She sent the message about Santos at practice. When the State Crime Lab completed its DNA analysis of the items found in the garbage truck, the results came back matching Sarah Johnson. Sheriff Femling later described the moment he received those results. He said his team had suspected Sarah from the beginning, but needed the science to confirm it. When the results came in, he said, "There it is. We got her." Investigators questioned Sarah one final time. She did not confess. After 45 minutes, Femling arrested her on 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was a junior in high school. The arrest made national headlines. One study cited at the time found that only 4 girls had been convicted of killing both parents in the United States over a 24-year period. Bruno Santos was not charged. He cooperated with the investigation and testified against Sarah at trial. Sarah's trial began in February 2005 in Blaine County. She was 18 by then, having turned 18 in January. The prosecution built its case around the DNA evidence, the recoil bruising, her access to the murder weapon through the guest house key, her changing accounts of what happened, and the 3-day gap between Alan's confrontation with Santos and the murders. The defense pointed to the unidentified fingerprints, later matched to Hill, and argued another person could have been responsible. Sarah took the stand and maintained she had heard shots and fled. She never changed that position. The jury returned guilty verdicts on both counts of first-degree murder. Sarah was sentenced to 2 fixed life terms plus a 15-year firearm enhancement. The sentence meant she would never leave prison. Matthew Johnson, her older brother, had been at university when his fiancée called to tell him his parents had been shot. He came home to a crime scene and a sister in handcuffs. The grief he carried out of that experience had no clean resolution. His parents were gone, and the person responsible was someone he had grown up with. Alan and Diane Johnson died in their bedroom on an ordinary Tuesday morning. They had been married for 2 decades. They had built everything they had carefully, raised 2 children, and paid close enough attention to their daughter's life to recognize that something was wrong. That attentiveness cost them everything. Sarah Marie Johnson is currently serving her sentence at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Pocatello, Idaho. Her Idaho Department of Corrections number is 77613. She is 38 years old as of 2026. The Idaho Supreme Court rejected her direct appeal in 2008. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear the case the same year. A post-conviction motion filed in 2014 involving updated DNA testing technology was denied. Further appeals in 2017 were also rejected. No court has found her arguments persuasive. Sarah has maintained in every filing, every hearing, and every appeal that she did not kill her parents. She will die in prison. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is the youngest on this list, a 12-year-old girl in a small Canadian city who planned the murder of her entire family alongside a 23-year-old man who wore a vial of blood around his neck and called himself a 300-year-old werewolf. And unlike Sarah Johnson, this daughter did not deny what she had done. Case 3. Jasmine Richardson. On April 23, 2006, the bodies of Mark Richardson, 42, His wife Deborah Richardson, 48, and their 8-year-old son Tyler Jacob Richardson were found inside their home on a quiet residential street in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. Mark and Deborah were in the basement. Tyler was upstairs in his bedroom. All three had been stabbed. The couple's 12-year-old daughter Jasmine was not in the house. Police initially feared she had been taken. She had not been taken. She had planned everything. Jasmine Richardson was convicted on July 9, 2007, of 3 counts of first-degree murder. She was the youngest person in Canadian history ever convicted of multiple murders. Because she was under 14 at the time of the crime, the maximum sentence allowed under Canadian law was 10 years. She was released in May 2016 at age 22. She expressed no remorse at her final court appearance and walked out of the hearing a free woman. Her co-conspirator was Jeremy Steinke, 23 years old, who identified himself online as a 300-year-old werewolf, wore a vial of blood around his neck, and was deeply embedded in the goth and vampire subculture that had taken root across online forums in the mid-2000s. Steinke was convicted in November 2008 of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The Richardson family was destroyed in a single night because Jasmine's parents told her she could not see a 23-year-old man they had never approved of. She was 12. Mark and Deborah Richardson had both struggled with drug addiction earlier in their lives. They had met at a gym in Sudbury, Ontario, married, and turned their lives around together. By the time they moved to Medicine Hat with their children, they had been clean for years. They were raising Jasmine and Tyler in a split-level home in a quiet part of the city. Medicine Hat had a population of roughly 60,000 people. It was the kind of place where neighbours knew each other and children played outside. Jasmine was described before 2006 as a happy and social girl. She was involved, engaged, and by most accounts, an ordinary child. That began to change around 2005, when she was drawn into the goth subculture through online communities, and a mutual friend who introduced her to that world. She began listening to artists like Marilyn Manson, developed an interest in serial killers, and started presenting herself differently. Darker clothes, different social circles, a different personality from the one her parents had known. Mark and Deborah noticed. They were concerned but had not yet understood how far the shift had gone. In early 2006, Jasmine met Jeremy Steinke at a punk rock concert. Steinke was 23 years old and unemployed, living in a trailer with his mother. He had grown up in difficult circumstances. His mother struggled with alcohol, her partners had been abusive toward him, and he had been bullied throughout his school years. By his early 20s, he had built an elaborate persona around the idea of being a supernatural creature. He wore the vial of blood as a permanent accessory. He maintained an account on a website called vampirefreaks.com. He claimed to be centuries old. His friends found the persona unsettling, but largely tolerated it. When Steinke met Jasmine, he later claimed he did not know she was 12. His friends disputed that, telling investigators they had repeatedly told him she was a child and urged him to end the relationship. He did not. The two began communicating online and in person, and within weeks were deeply involved with each other in a way that Jasmine's parents found alarming when they discovered it. Mark and Deborah forbade the relationship immediately. Jasmine was grounded and told she could not see Steinke. She complied on the surface and continued the relationship in secret. The communication between Jasmine and Steinke in the weeks before April 23, 2006 was later recovered by investigators and presented in court. On his online blog, Steinke wrote about his anger toward Jasmine's parents. In one post, he wrote about wanting to slit their throats and described their blood as payment for keeping them apart. That post was written on April 3, 2006, 20 days before the murders. Jasmine and Steinke discussed killing her family in online messages and in person. Steinke later said at certain points that the conversations were hypothetical and that Jasmine had not truly intended to go through with it. The court did not accept that account. The evidence showed planning, coordination, and deliberate execution. The night before the murders, Jasmine and Steinke watched Oliver Stone's 1994 film Natural-Born Killers together, a film about a couple who murder the woman's parents before going on a killing spree. The following day, the plan was carried out. In the early hours of April 23, 2006, Steinke entered the Richardson home through a basement window. He was drunk and had consumed cocaine, marijuana, and ecstasy. Deborah Richardson woke up and came to investigate the noise. When she saw Steinke, he attacked her immediately. He stabbed her 12 times. One of the wounds was a 12-centimeter deep piercing to her heart. Deborah had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. She fought back. When Mark heard his wife and came downstairs, Steinke attacked him too. Mark was stabbed 24 times, including 9 times in the back. One of his fingers was nearly severed. Mark also had extensive defensive wounds. He fought for his life until he could not anymore. While Steinke was killing her parents downstairs, Jasmine went to her brother's room. Tyler Jacob Richardson was 8 years old. He weighed 68 pounds. Court testimony later stated that Tyler said he was scared and that he was too young to die. Jasmine stabbed him twice in the chest and once in the face, near his right ear. She slit his throat. The wound to his windpipe caused him to make gurgling sounds as he swallowed his own blood. An autopsy found blood in his lungs. He was alive for some time after he was stabbed. Jasmine listened to her brother die. After the murders, Steinke and Jasmine gathered a few belongings, including a suitcase Jasmine had packed, and drove away with a friend named Casey Lancaster, who knew what had happened and agreed to take them. Police launched a search for Jasmine, initially treating her as a possible victim. Evidence recovered from her bedroom and her school locker changed that assessment quickly. Inside her locker, investigators found a stick figure drawing depicting her family being murdered. The search shifted from a missing child case to a manhunt. Jasmine and Steinke were tracked to the town of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat, and arrested on April 25, 2006. Lancaster was later charged as an accessory for driving them away and helping dispose of evidence. When police arrested Steinke, he told a female friend, before being taken away to tell his mother he loved her and that she could have his television. The discovery of the bodies had been made not by police but by a 6-year-old boy, a friend of Tyler's who had come to the house for a playdate. He looked through a window and saw the bodies of Mark and Deborah on the basement floor. He ran home and told his mother, who called police. Both Jasmine and Steinke were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder each. Under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act, Jasmine could not be named in media coverage. She was referred to only as JR throughout the public proceedings. The Act also stipulated that offenders under 14 at the time of their crime could not be sentenced as adults and could receive a maximum of 10 years. Jasmine had been 12 when the murders occurred. Jasmine's trial took place in the Court of Queen's Bench in Medicine Hat. She pleaded not guilty. She told the court that the conversations about killing her family had been hypothetical, that she had not intended for any of it to actually happen. The prosecution presented the online messages, the blog posts, the stick figure drawing from her locker, the packed suitcase, and witness testimony from people Steinke had spoken to about the plan. On July 9, 2007, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jasmine guilty on all 3 counts. On November 8, 2007, she was sentenced to the maximum allowable under law, 10 years of intensive rehabilitative custody and supervision. The sentence included 18 months of credit for time already served, followed by 4 years in a psychiatric institution and 4.5 years under conditional supervision in the community. She was 13 years old at sentencing. Steinke's trial followed in late 2008. He had confessed to the killings during a conversation with an undercover police officer while in custody. In his trial, he attempted to argue that his intoxicated state on the night of the murders and the influence Jasmine had over him should reduce the charges to manslaughter. He also claimed at certain points that it was Jasmine who had slit Tyler's throat, while he watched from the doorway. The prosecution argued against any reduction. In November 2008, Steinke was found guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. In December 2008, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Deborah Richardson's brother Peter Doolan appeared at Steinke's sentencing and delivered a statement of forgiveness. He said he did not understand why his sister had been taken and that he never would. But he said his sister had taught him forgiveness and that he had chosen to extend it. That statement stood in stark contrast to the brutality of what Steinke and Jasmine had done. Jasmine served her sentence at a psychiatric facility, then transitioned to conditional supervision in the community. During her conditional period, she was permitted to attend Mount Royal University in Calgary. In May 2016, she appeared before Queen's Bench Justice Scott Brooker for a final hearing. No conditions were attached to her ongoing life. She offered no apology and expressed no remorse. Justice Brooker told her he believed her parents and brother would be proud of her progress. She walked out of the courtroom a free woman at age 22. Mark Richardson was 42, Deborah was 48. Tyler was 8 years old and had come downstairs for a play date the next morning that he never got to have. The friend who discovered him was 6. Medicine Hat spent years processing what had happened on that residential street. The youngest multiple murderer in Canadian history, a 23-year-old man who thought he was a werewolf, and a family that did nothing wrong except tell their daughter she could not see someone they were right to be afraid of. Jasmine Richardson is believed to be living in Canada under a different name. Her current location is not publicly known. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case stayed in North America but moved to Texas, where a 16-year-old girl from a deeply religious family decided that the only way she could keep seeing her boyfriend was to make sure her entire family was dead. And unlike Jasmine Richardson, she did not pick up a weapon herself. Case 4. Erin Caffey. On the morning of March 1, 2008, Terry Caffey woke up to the sound of his bedroom door hitting the dryer in the laundry room next to where he slept. He had been shot before he was fully awake. By the time the sun came up, his wife Penny was dead, his 2 sons Matthew and Tyler were dead, and his house was on fire. Terry had been shot 5 times and left to burn inside the house. He crawled out of a window and moved on his hands and knees through the dark for nearly an hour, falling into a creek at one point, until he reached his neighbour Tommy Gaston's house. He told the first person who found him that Charlie Wilkinson had shot his family. Terry Caffey was 41 years old. His wife Penny was 39. Their son Matthew was 13. Their son Tyler was 8. Their daughter Erin was 16. Erin was not in the house when the shooting happened. She was sitting in a car outside, waiting. Erin Caffey was charged with 3 counts of capital murder. She pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole for 25 years. Charlie Wilkinson, her 18-year-old boyfriend, and his 22-year-old friend Charles Wade were both sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The Caffey family was devout, church-going, and by every account a loving household. What Erin decided to do to them because her parents told her to stop seeing a boy she had known for 5 months is the subject of this case. The Caffey family lived in Alba, Texas, a rural community with a population of roughly 492 people at the time of the murders. Terry served as a youth pastor at Miracle Faith Baptist Church. Penny played piano, Matthew played harmonica. Tyler was 8 years old. Erin sang in the choir with enough emotion that she sometimes broke down in tears during services. The family homeschooled their children for 3 years, using a Bible-based curriculum before re-enrolling them in public schools 6 weeks before the murders. Erin began attending Rains High School in early 2008. In the summer of 2007, shortly after turning 16, Erin started working part-time as a car hop at a Sonic fast food restaurant in town. It was there that she met Charlie Wilkinson, who was about to begin his senior year of high school. Wilkinson came by the restaurant regularly and eventually asked Erin out. A friend of Wilkinson's later told police that Charlie considered Erin his soulmate. Wilkinson gave Erin a promise ring that had belonged to his grandmother. He attended church services with the family. He spoke openly about wanting to marry her. Terry and Penny Caffey were not immediately hostile to Wilkinson. They allowed him to visit the house, join the family at bonfires, and spend time with Erin as long as the boundaries they set were respected. He had to leave by 9 p.m. Erin could call him when he got home, but had a phone curfew of 10 p.m. Dates were not permitted without a chaperone. These were the rules of a conservative Christian household trying to navigate their teenage daughter's first serious relationship. For a while it worked. What changed was Wilkinson's MySpace page. Penny discovered it after an aunt encouraged her to look. The page was full of references to sex and alcohol, content that clashed directly with the values the Caffeys had built their family around. In early February 2008, Penny also caught Erin on the phone with Wilkinson past her curfew and grounded her. The grounding meant no more visits from Wilkinson and no contact. The family also took away Erin's car. Erin did not accept this quietly. That same month, friends of Erin's later told investigators that she had begun talking about killing her parents. She said it was the only way she and Wilkinson could be together. This was not a passing comment made once in frustration. Multiple people heard it. One of those people was a former boyfriend of Erin's. He later told investigators that Erin had previously tried to get him to help her kill her family over a different conflict. He had refused and ended the relationship because of it. The plot that formed involved Erin, Wilkinson, Wilkinson's friend Charles Wade, and Wade's girlfriend Bobby Johnson. Accounts differ on exactly who first suggested murder as the solution. Wilkinson later told investigators he had initially encouraged Erin to simply run away with him. He said Erin refused that option and insisted on the murders instead. Erin's position was the opposite. She said the violence was Wilkinson's idea and that he had anger issues she had not fully understood. Terry Caffey, who survived and has spoken about the case many times in the years since, has said he does not believe Erin was the mastermind. He believes Wilkinson was a controlling and psychopathic influence on a vulnerable 16-year-old girl. What is not disputed is that Erin knew what was going to happen on the night of February 28th into the early hours of March 1st, 2008. She had packed a suitcase. She knew Wilkinson and Wade were going to enter the house. Before they went in, Wilkinson told her that he would have to kill her brothers as well, because they could not leave witnesses. Erin's response, according to testimony from Wilkinson and Wade, and corroborated by other witnesses, was, "I don't care. Just do what you gotta do." At around 3 a.m. on March 1st, Wilkinson and Wade entered the Caffey home, while Erin and Bobby Johnson waited outside in a car. Wilkinson went to Terry and Penny's bedroom and fired a .22 caliber pistol at the couple as they slept. Terry was struck multiple times. Penny was also shot. Wilkinson's gun jammed. Wade pulled out a samurai-style sword and used it on Penny. The wound was severe enough to nearly decapitate her. Penny Caffey died in the bedroom. Wilkinson and Wade then went upstairs to where the boys were. Terry, lying shot on the bedroom floor, heard his son Matthew cry out, "Charlie, no, please, why are you doing this?" Matthew was 13 years old. He was shot and then attacked with the sword. Tyler was 8 years old. He was shot in the face and stabbed repeatedly with the sword. Both boys were killed. Terry Caffey remained on the bedroom floor, shot 5 times, once in the head, twice near his right shoulder, and twice in the back, and heard everything that happened to his family while he lay unable to move. After the killings, Wilkinson and Wade took a lockbox full of money, grabbed Terry's wallet and Penny's purse, and took the suitcase Erin had packed. Wilkinson had promised Wade $2,000 for helping. They poured lighter fluid on furniture and clothing and set the house on fire before leaving. Terry regained consciousness as the fire spread. He got out through a window and began crawling toward Gaston's house. The journey took him nearly an hour. He fell into a creek and nearly drowned. He kept moving. He was covered in blood and wearing only a t-shirt, pajama bottoms, and a single wet sock when Gaston's neighbour found him outside. He told them immediately that Charlie Wilkinson had done this. Emergency services were called and arrived to find the Caffey home fully consumed by fire. The first officer on the scene was the only officer on duty in the area at that hour. He called the fire department and began coordinating the response. Investigators quickly identified Wilkinson as the suspect based on Terry's statement. In a community as small as Alba and the neighbouring town of Emery, Wilkinson was not a stranger to local law enforcement. The chief deputy had known Wilkinson for years. His own sons had gone fishing and four-wheeling with him. Investigators tracked Wilkinson to a trailer belonging to Wade. They found him in a back bedroom, lying on a mattress with a handgun on the floor beside him. He was taken outside and handcuffed without resistance. Erin was also found at the trailer. She claimed she had been drugged and kidnapped. That story fell apart within hours. Wilkinson and Wade both told police that the murders had been Erin's idea. Other witnesses confirmed that Erin had spoken about killing her parents before the night of the attack. A previous boyfriend confirmed she had tried to recruit him to do the same thing months earlier. Erin was transported toward the hospital where Terry was being treated, accompanied by her grandparents and sheriff's deputies. During that drive, investigators received confirmation that Erin was now a suspect. Deputies handcuffed her in the vehicle. She broke down and told her grandparents she had nothing to do with it. All 4 suspects were in custody within 24 hours of the attack. A Rains County grand jury indicted Wilkinson, Wade, and Johnson on capital murder charges. Erin faced the same charges. Because of her age, she went through a certification hearing to determine whether she would be tried as an adult. She was certified for adult prosecution. Terry Caffey appeared at that hearing and asked the judge to allow Erin to come home with him rather than remain in juvenile custody. The judge refused. Eventually, all 4 pleaded guilty. Wilkinson and Wade were each sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Bobby Johnson received 40 years. Erin was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. She will be eligible for her first parole hearing when she has served that minimum. Prosecutors had initially sought the death penalty for Wilkinson and Wade. Terry Caffey personally asked them not to pursue it. He said he wanted them to have the chance to find remorse. He also said the deaths of the men who killed his family would not bring anyone back. Terry Caffey rebuilt his life in the years that followed. He remarried. He and his new wife Karen have 4 children together. He ministers full-time and has spoken at over 600 schools and over 800 churches about what happened to his family and about the choice he made to forgive his daughter. He still visits Erin in prison. He has said publicly that he believes Erin was a vulnerable girl, manipulated by a controlling and dangerous young man. Not everyone agrees with that reading. The prosecutors who worked the case did not. Penny Caffey was 39 years old and played piano in her church. Matthew was 13 and played harmonica. Tyler was 8. They were killed in their beds in the early hours of a Saturday morning because a 16-year-old girl could not accept being told she had to end a 5-month relationship. Erin is currently serving her sentence at a correctional facility in Greenville, Texas. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case moves away from daughters who wanted to keep a boyfriend and into something colder. A 19-year-old who looked at her boyfriend's family fortune and decided the most efficient path to getting it was to have both of his parents killed before they could change his inheritance. Case 5. Chelsea Richardson. On the night of December 11, 2003, Rick and Susanna Walmsley were shot and stabbed to death inside their home in the Walnut Estates neighborhood of Mansfield, Texas. Rick was 46, Susanna was 45. They were found by police after a strange 911 call came in from their address with no one on the line. Their son Andrew was not home. Their daughter Sarah was not home. The house was empty except for the bodies of 2 people who had been shot in the head and stabbed a combined total of 36 times. The person who planned the murders was not a member of the Walmsley family. She was Andrew Walmsley's 19-year-old girlfriend, Chelsea Lee Richardson. Chelsea had decided that Rick and Susanna Walmsley needed to die so that Andrew could inherit the family estate, valued at approximately $1.65 million. She recruited Andrew, her own roommate, and an IHOP restaurant manager to make it happen. She organised at least 2 failed attempts before the third one succeeded. In May 2005, a jury convicted Chelsea Richardson of capital murder after 3 hours of deliberation. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection and became the first woman ever sentenced to death in Tarrant County, Texas. That sentence was later commuted to life in prison in December 2011, following a finding that prosecutors had withheld evidence from her defense team. She will not be eligible for parole until 2044. Rick Walmsley worked in the oil industry. The job paid well, and the family lived comfortably in Mansfield, a suburb roughly 20 miles southeast of Fort Worth. They had 2 children, a daughter named Sarah and a son named Andrew. By 2003, Andrew was 19 years old and had graduated from Mansfield High School the previous year. He had started college but dropped out. When he dropped out, his parents cut off his financial support. The Wamsleys had built their wealth carefully and expected their son to apply himself the same way. Andrew did not see it that way. He had grown accustomed to the lifestyle his father's income provided and had no interest in working toward it himself. In January 2003, Andrew began dating Chelsea Richardson. Chelsea had grown up in a working-class neighbourhood in Tarrant County. She was 18 when they met, had not gone to college, and was living with a roommate named Susanna Toledano. Andrew and Chelsea met at the IHOP in Arlington where their social circle gathered. The relationship became serious quickly. Andrew's parents disapproved of Chelsea. They felt she was not the right fit for their son and made their feelings known. Chelsea was aware of their disapproval. By October 2003, Chelsea and Andrew had begun discussing killing his parents. The conversations happened at the IHOP in Arlington, which became the planning location for what would eventually be a murder conspiracy involving 4 people. Chelsea was the organiser. Andrew wanted the inheritance. Chelsea wanted the life that inheritance would buy. Together they brought in Susanna Toledano, Chelsea's roommate, and Hilario Cardenas, the manager of the Arlington IHOP, who provided the firearm that would be used in the murders. The plan was not executed cleanly or quickly. On November 9, 2003, the group made their first serious attempt. Toledano fired at the gas tank of the Wamsleys' Jeep Laredo in an attempt to cause an explosion. The attempt failed. The Wamsleys were unharmed and unaware of what had just been attempted. A second attempt also failed. By December, the group was determined to follow through, and the plan shifted to a direct entry into the home. The murders happened on December 11, 2003. Toledano entered the Wamsley home that night. What followed was not quick. Rick Wamsley was shot in the head and in the back. He was stabbed 18 times. He fought back. During the struggle, Rick physically wrestled with Toledano, at one point forcing her back into the living room and falling on top of her. Andrew intervened and tried to pull his own father off Toledano. Chelsea shot Rick in the back during the struggle. When Rick was still alive and sitting on the floor, he asked why this was happening to him. Chelsea then took a knife from the Wamsleys' kitchen and stabbed him in the hand as he tried to block the blow. Toledano stabbed him in the back with a second kitchen knife. Rick Wamsley died on the floor of his own home. Susanna Wamsley was also shot in the head and stabbed 18 times. The detail that broke the case open was a single strand of hair. Rick Wamsley had fought so hard against the people killing him that investigators found Toledano's hair clutched in his fist after his death. That hair connected Toledano to the crime scene. From Toledano, the investigation expanded to Andrew and Chelsea. All 3 were arrested in April 2004, Chelsea on April 7th, 2 days after Toledano was taken into custody. Before her arrest, Chelsea had written a letter to Toledano from jail. Toledano had been picked up first, fabricating a pregnancy and begging her former roommate to clear her name. Chelsea also asked a mentally challenged friend to provide her with a false alibi and to lie to the grand jury investigating the murders. That friend complied initially, but the deception was uncovered. Toledano, facing the death penalty, agreed to plead guilty and testify for the prosecution in exchange for a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Her testimony at Chelsea's trial was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. She described in detail how Chelsea had organized the conspiracy, directed the planning, and participated in the murders directly, including shooting Rick Wamsley in the back and stabbing him while he was still alive on the floor. 2 former cellmates of Chelsea's from the Tarrant County Jail also testified. Both said Chelsea had admitted to them that she had shot Rick Wamsley. One of them, Catherine Norton, said Chelsea had initially claimed innocence and then reversed course and described her role in the killing. Chelsea's defense team noted that both witnesses had received benefits in exchange for their testimony and challenged their credibility. The jury did not find those challenges persuasive. A handwriting expert testified about a letter that had been sent to Chelsea's mother, Celia Richardson, which appeared to suggest Toledano had written to say Chelsea was not involved. Toledano denied writing it. The handwriting expert said the letter was overwhelmingly consistent with Toledano's handwriting. Prosecutors countered that the letter was irrelevant to what the physical evidence and Toledano's direct testimony had established. Chelsea's trial lasted 6 days. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and returned a guilty verdict on the charge of capital murder. They then deliberated for just over 2 hours on the question of sentencing and unanimously voted to recommend death by lethal injection. In doing so, the jury cited the brutal and premeditated nature of the crime and found that Chelsea posed a continuing danger to society. On August 10, 2005, she was formally sentenced to death and became the first woman to go to death row in Tarrant County, Texas. Andrew Walmsley was tried separately. His trial concluded on March 5, 2006, and he was also convicted of capital murder. The jury in his case did not find him to be a future danger to society in the same way they had with Chelsea, and sentenced him to life in prison rather than death. He is serving that sentence. Toledano, having taken the plea deal, was sentenced to life in prison on May 26, 2006, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She will be eligible to apply for parole in 2034. Hilario Cardenas, the IHOP manager who sourced the murder weapon, pleaded guilty to conspiracy and received a 50-year sentence. He was denied parole in both 2016 and 2017. Chelsea's case then entered a years-long appeal process. In January 2008, she lost an appeal before the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. In 2007 and 2008, her appeals attorney Robert Ford filed a writ of habeas corpus, raising 9 points of error. The most significant of these was the allegation that the original prosecutor, Mike Parrish, had withheld notes from a psychologist who had interviewed Toledano. Those notes, 11 handwritten pages, contained statements from Toledano in which she said she was more guilty than either of the others, that she did wrong, and that she probably could have prevented the killings. The defense argued those notes should have been provided to Chelsea's trial attorneys and that they could have changed the outcome of her sentencing. A judge from outside the county was appointed to hear the appeal. Tarrant County District Attorney Joe Shannon made the decision that his office would not pursue the death penalty a second time, given the appearance of prosecutorial misconduct. On December 13, 2011, Chelsea's sentence was formally commuted from death to life in prison. She pleaded guilty as part of the agreement and is now eligible for parole in 2044. She was 27 years old when the commutation happened. Chelsea Richardson is currently incarcerated at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. Her Texas Department of Criminal Justice number is 999499. She is in her early 40s. Rick Walmsley asked why this was happening to him as he sat on his own living room floor, bleeding from gunshot wounds and stab wounds, while the people killing him stood over him. Nobody answered. He died without knowing that his own son had organized it, that his son's girlfriend had spent weeks planning it, and that the motive was a $1.65 million estate he had spent his working life building. Susanna Walmsley was killed in the same house on the same night. The group had also planned to kill the Walmsley's daughter, Sarah, who would have been an additional heir. Sarah was not home that night. Two people built something over the course of their lives and were killed for it by the people who simply wanted to take it without earning it. That is the full extent of what Chelsea Richardson decided their lives were worth. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is different in almost every way. No inheritance, no boyfriend's family, no financial motive at all. Just a teenage girl in Florida who decided that a boy she was sharing with another girl was worth more than that other girl's life, and who made sure the entire neighborhood knew exactly what she was going to do, long before she did it. Case 6. Rachel Wade. On the night of April 14, 2009, Sarah Rose Ludeman drove her mother's van toward a neighborhood in Largo, Florida, where she had been told Rachel Wade was waiting. Sarah was 18 years old. She brought 2 friends with her. When she arrived, Rachel Wade walked up to the vehicle and drove a steak knife into Sarah's chest, with enough force that the blade bent on impact. One of the stab wounds punctured Sarah's heart. Sarah Ludeman was pronounced dead at the hospital. Rachel Wade was 19 years old. She stood at the scene after the stabbing and asked the responding police officers for a cigarette. In July 2010, a jury found Rachel Wade guilty of second-degree murder after deliberating for less than 3 hours. She was sentenced to 27 years in state prison by Pinellas Pasco Circuit Judge Bellone, who told her plainly that the murder was no accident. Rachel Wade is currently serving that sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Her projected release date is March 2032. The case was not complicated. Rachel Wade had told Sarah Ludeman 8 months before the stabbing, in a voicemail message that Sarah saved and eventually played for police, that she was going to murder her. She used those exact words. The jury heard the voicemail. It took them less than 3 hours. What sits underneath this case is a months-long feud between 2 teenage girls over a young man named Joshua Camacho, who was openly seeing both of them at the same time and made no serious effort to stop either relationship. Camacho was 20 years old. He was not charged with any crime. Sarah Rose Ludeman was born on December 7, 1990, to Charles and Gay Ludeman in Pinellas Park, Florida. She was a high school senior at Pinellas Park High School. People who knew her described her as a good student who had been on track before she met Camacho. Her best friend later said that Josh was Sarah's first boyfriend, her first everything, and that Sarah loved him completely. Her mother described him as a big part of the reason Sarah was killed. Rachel Wade grew up in the same general area of Pinellas County. She worked at an Applebee's restaurant. She had been in a relationship with Camacho and considered him her boyfriend. When she discovered he was also involved with Sarah Ludeman and others, she did not end the relationship with Camacho or walk away. She directed her anger entirely at the other girls, and at Sarah in particular. Joshua Camacho was openly involved with multiple women simultaneously. He knew both Rachel and Sarah were aware of each other. He did not resolve the situation. He continued seeing both of them, continued accepting attention and affection from both, and allowed a situation that was always going to end badly to get worse month by month throughout 2008 and into 2009. The feud between Rachel and Sarah began in the summer of 2008 and played out across every available platform: voicemails, text messages, MySpace posts, and in-person confrontations. They clashed outside a movie theatre. They confronted each other in a Taco Bell parking lot. Sarah and her friends went to the Applebee's where Rachel worked and knocked her food tray over, sang a song called Girl Fight during karaoke, and taunted her in front of her co-workers. Rachel filed a police report. Sarah filed a police report. The hostility was mutual and escalating. But the voicemails Rachel left for Sarah were in a different category entirely. In August 2008, Rachel called Sarah and left a message in which she said she was going to murder her. She told Sarah to watch her back. She said she was guaranteeing that she was going to kill her and that Sarah should know that now. Sarah saved that voicemail. She saved several others like it. When investigators later listened to those recordings, they had 8 months of documented death threats from Rachel to Sarah on file. By April 2009, the situation had not resolved. Camacho was still in contact with both of them. On the evening of April 14th, Rachel was alone in her apartment waiting for Camacho, who was at Sarah's house watching movies. While walking her dog outside, Rachel heard a car honk and claimed she heard Sarah yell something at her from a passing vehicle. Rachel went back inside, opened a kitchen drawer, and took out a steak knife. She put it in her purse. She then called a former boyfriend named Javier Laboy and drove to his house in a nearby neighbourhood. At some point that evening, Sarah found out that Rachel was at Laboy's house. Sarah got in her mother's van with 2 friends and drove toward that neighbourhood. While she was driving, Rachel called her. During that call, Rachel told Sarah she was going to stab her and her Mexican boyfriend. Sarah did not turn around. Sarah arrived at Laboy's house. Witnesses at the scene gave conflicting accounts of exactly how the physical confrontation began. Rachel's defense attorney argued at trial that Sarah had slammed on the brakes, nearly hit Rachel with the van, and stormed out of the vehicle with her fists swinging, and that Rachel had acted in self-defense. The prosecution's witnesses, including Camacho's sister and a friend named Dustin Grimes who was present, testified that Rachel approached the vehicle and attacked Sarah. They said Sarah did not get a chance to fully exit the van before she was stabbed. The physical facts supported the prosecution's account. Rachel was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed approximately 100 pounds. Sarah was 5 inches taller and 60 pounds heavier. The defense pointed to that size difference to argue that Rachel had reason to feel physically threatened. The prosecution pointed to the fact that Rachel had taken the knife from her apartment before going to LeBoy's house, before any physical confrontation had taken place, as evidence that what followed was not self-defense, but the execution of something she had already planned to do. Sarah Ludeman was stabbed in the shoulder and the chest. One blow went directly into her heart. She clutched her chest and called Camacho on her phone to tell him what had happened. Camacho ran to Sarah's home to tell her father. Sarah was transported to the hospital and pronounced dead. Rachel Wade remained at the scene. She did not flee. When police arrived, she was still there. She asked an officer for a cigarette. That detail was raised at trial as evidence of her state of mind in the immediate aftermath of stabbing an 18-year-old girl to death. Rachel was taken to the Pinellas Park Police Department for a formal interview. She told officers she had been scared when Sarah pulled up, and that she had not planned to stab her. She said the stabbing was an accident, that she had been trying to hit back, and the knife connected by chance. When Sarah was pronounced dead at the hospital, Rachel was arrested and charged with murder. The case went to trial in July 2010. It lasted 3 days. Rachel took the stand in her own defense and argued that she had acted in self-defense under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Her attorney, Jay Hebert, argued that Sarah and her friends had been on their way to confront Rachel that night, that Sarah was the aggressor, and that the size difference between the two women gave Rachel legitimate reason to fear for her safety. The prosecution's response was straightforward. Prosecutor Wesley Dickus played the voicemails for the jury. The jury heard Rachel, in her own voice, telling Sarah 8 months earlier that she was going to murder her. Dickus also pointed out that Rachel had taken the knife from her kitchen drawer before leaving her apartment, before she had any contact with Sarah that night, before any confrontation had happened, and before she had any reason to believe she was in physical danger. He described the stabbing as so violent that the knife blade bent. He told the jury that Rachel Wade had sat back as Sarah Ludeman lay dying and asked the police for a cigarette. The jury of 5 men and 1 woman deliberated for 2.5 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. At sentencing on September 3, 2010, Judge Balone acknowledged Rachel's youth and her lack of a prior criminal record as mitigating factors. He then sentenced her to 27 years in state prison. He told her the murder was no accident. Rachel addressed the court before sentencing and apologized to Sarah's parents. She said she was sorry to be the one who had caused them such pain, and that some days she felt it should have been her instead. Gay Ludeman, Sarah's mother, sat in the courtroom and heard those words. Gay Ludeman later said publicly that Joshua Camacho was a big part of the reason her daughter was dead. She said Sarah had loved him completely until the end. Camacho was never charged with any crime related to Sarah's death. He moved on. Sarah Ludeman was 18 years old. She was a miracle baby. Her parents had been told they could never have children. Her father drove a cab. Her mother worked in healthcare. They had raised a daughter who was doing well until she met a young man who did not care enough about either of the girls fighting over him to simply make a choice and stop the situation from spiraling. Sarah Ludeman paid for that with her life. Rachel Wade has been at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida, since her sentencing. Her projected release date is March 2032. She will be 42 years old when she gets out. She gave a number of interviews after her conviction and expressed remorse. Whether that remorse is genuine is something only she knows. What is documented is that 8 months before she stabbed Sarah Ludeman in the heart, she called her on the phone and told her exactly what she was going to do. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a young woman who did not use a knife and did not act in the heat of a feud. She used 5 different weapons, inflicted more than 300 wounds on a single person, then tied herself up, lay on the floor, and waited to be found, expecting everyone to believe she was a victim. Case 7. Brittany Norwood. On the morning of March 12, 2011, A manager named Rachel Ertley arrived at the Lululemon Athletica store in Bethesda, Maryland, to open for the day. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the store was in complete disarray. Merchandise scattered, mannequins knocked over, chairs and mops thrown across the floor. Ertley heard moaning coming from somewhere in the back. She went outside and asked a man standing nearby to go in and check. He walked to the back of the store and found two women covered in blood. One of them was face down in a pool of blood in the back hallway. The other was in the bathroom, bound at the wrists and ankles with zip ties, with a cut on her forehead and scratches on her stomach. Ertley called 911 and said there were two people in the back of her store. One appeared to be dead and the other was breathing. The woman on the hallway floor was Jana Troxell Murray, 30 years old. She was dead. The medical examiner would later determine she had sustained at least 331 individual wounds from at least 5 different weapons. The woman in the bathroom, bound and apparently semi-conscious, was Brittany Norwood, 27 years old. She told police that 2 men in ski masks had broken in, attacked and sexually assaulted both of them, and left them for dead. Every word of that story was a lie. On November 2, 2011, a Montgomery County jury found Brittany Norwood guilty of first-degree murder after 1 hour of deliberation. On January 27, 2012, Judge Robert Greenberg sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He said that in his entire career, he could remember perhaps 2 crimes that matched this case for sheer brutality. Brittany Norwood is currently serving that sentence at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women in Jessup, Maryland. Jana Murray had grown up in a close family in Texas. Her father David described her as one of the most fearless people he had ever known. Her mother Phyllis said Jana greeted everyone she met, whether she had known them for 2 seconds or 2 years, with a smile and a hug. Jana had moved to the Washington, D.C. area and was working at the Lululemon store in Bethesda's upscale Bethesda Row shopping district. She was 30 years old and had recently celebrated her birthday by going bungee jumping. A video of that bungee jump was played for the court during Brittany Norwood's sentencing. Brittany Norwood had also been working at the same Lululemon store. She was 27. Her brother Andre later testified at her sentencing that the person presented at trial was not the sister he knew and that his family continued to love her. By every external measure, Brittany appeared to be a normal young woman with a normal job. There was nothing in her public life that pointed toward what she was capable of. The 2 women had not been particularly close. Jana's mother said Brittany's name had never come up in conversations about Jana's friends or co-workers. She had never been mentioned. They were colleagues who closed the store together on the evening of March 11, 2011. That shift ended in Jana Murray's death. On the evening of March 11th, Brittany and Jana closed the Lululemon store together and left at around 9:45 p.m. The standard closing procedure at Lululemon involved employees checking each other's bags before leaving, a routine security measure to prevent theft. During that check, Jana found a pair of Lululemon pants in Brittany's bag. Jana called the store manager to report it. The manager said she would deal with it in the morning and that Jana should go home. A few minutes later, Brittany called Jana and told her she had forgotten something in the store and needed to be let back in to retrieve it. Jana went back. She opened the door for Brittany. That was the last decision Jana Murray made. What happened next was established through forensic evidence, physical reconstruction of the crime scene, and the testimony of employees at the Apple store next door, which shared a wall with Lululemon. Shortly after 10 p.m., Apple store employees heard sounds coming through that shared wall, sounds of dragging, grunting, thudding, and high-pitched squealing. 2 employees stood next to the wall and listened for approximately 9 minutes. One of them heard a woman's voice saying, "Talk to me, don't do this, talk to me, what's going on?" Then came screaming, the sound of something or someone being struck repeatedly, and then a weak voice saying, "God help me, please help me." The Apple store employees did not call 911, they walked away. A security guard nearby was listening to music on an iPod. Jana Murray was alive for a significant portion of what Brittany Norwood did to her. The medical examiner testified that the 331 wounds included 107 defensive wounds. Cuts and injuries on Jana's hands, arms, and body that she sustained while trying to protect herself. The number 107 was described at trial as something the medical examiner had never seen before in a single case. The wounds were caused by at least 5 weapons: a knife, a hammer, a wrench, a box cutter, and an X-Acto knife. Brittany gathered those weapons from various locations around the store during the attack. The time it took her to move through the store collecting weapons was cited by prosecutors as evidence of premeditation. She was not acting in a blind rage. She was arming herself repeatedly over the course of an extended assault. The medical examiner also noted that many of the wounds were not immediately fatal, that Jayna had been alive and aware for much of what was done to her. The ligature found around Jayna's neck indicated she had also been choked. After Jayna was dead, Brittany went to work on the scene. She put on a pair of men's Reebok sneakers, size 14, that were found inside the store and used them to track bloody footprints across the floor, creating the impression that a large male intruder had been present. She moved Jayna's car from its parking spot outside to a different location further from the store. She opened the store's safe and removed 3 bags of cash. She cut a slit in the crotch of Jayna's pants to make it appear that Jayna had been sexually assaulted. She inflicted superficial cuts on herself. She bound her own wrists and ankles with zip ties. She lay down on the bathroom floor and waited to be discovered the following morning. The forensic evidence demolished her account within days. Investigators found only 2 sets of footprints in the blood: Brittany's own shoes and the men's size 14 Reeboks, which were found inside the store. The bloody footprints from the Reeboks did not lead to either exit. They ended inside the store, which meant no one had walked out in them. Medical examination found no evidence that either woman had been sexually assaulted. The cut in Jayna's pants had been made after she died. The blood found on Brittany's face had dripped straight down from a cut on her forehead, indicating she had been upright most of the night, not lying unconscious on a bathroom floor. Brittany's own car, which she had driven to the store, was found parked nearby. Jayna's car had been moved. Investigators found blood from both women inside Jayna's car, which Brittany had driven after the attack in order to reposition it. Police interviewed Brittany at Suburban Hospital on the morning of March 12th. She described the 2 masked attackers in detail. She said they were one tall and one short, both wearing dark clothing, and that they had raped her with a clothing hanger and attacked Jayna with brutal force. She was detailed, consistent, and calm. Investigators spoke to her a second time the same day. They were already beginning to doubt her account. By March 16th, investigators had formally identified Brittany as a suspect rather than a victim. They called her in to provide elimination fingerprints and hair samples, describing it as routine. It was, as the lead detective later testified, also a deliberate effort to get her talking again. Brittany came in voluntarily and spoke freely. On March 18th, she came in again. That evening, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial began in late October 2011. It lasted 8 days. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence, the footprints, the blood spatter analysis, the medical examiner's findings, the Apple Store employee's testimony about what they heard through the wall, and the physical impossibility of Brittany's account of the attack. The defense argued that there had been no premeditation, that an argument had escalated into a fight, and Brittany had lost control. Defense attorney Douglas Wood told the jury that Brittany had grabbed what was within reach, and that while the death of Jayna Murray was a tragedy, it was not first-degree murder. The jury did not accept that argument. The number of weapons used, the time required to collect them from different parts of the store, the length of the attack as established by the Apple Store employees' 9 minutes of listening, and the elaborate staging of the crime scene afterward all pointed in one direction. After 1 hour of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. At sentencing on January 27, 2012, 8 members of Jayna Murray's family and friend group stood before the court and read impact statements. Her brother Hugh said that March 12, 2011 was his family's September 11, 2001, that nothing would ever be normal again. Her mother Phyllis asked for life without parole, saying Jayna's murderer should never be able to walk the streets as a free person. Her father David said that Jayna was not just his daughter, She was one of his 4 best friends. He said the sentence was absolutely the right one under Maryland law. Brittany Norwood spoke before sentencing. She said she was deeply sorry and that she knew nothing she said would take away the pain of losing Jana. The Murray family said they believed she said it only in hope of receiving a shorter sentence. It did not work. Judge Greenberg sentenced her to life without the possibility of parole. Jana Murray went back to that store at night because a co-worker called and said she had forgotten something. She had no reason to think twice about it. She had done nothing wrong. She was killed with 331 wounds in the back of a yoga clothing store because the person who called her back did not want to face the consequence of getting caught stealing a pair of pants. Brittany Norwood will die in prison. Jana Murray's family launched the Jana Troxell Murray Foundation in her memory. The bungee jumping video from her 30th birthday was played in a packed courtroom during the sentencing of the woman who killed her. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case takes a completely different form. No physical confrontation, no weapon in hand, and no presence at the scene of the crime at all. Just a young woman in Canada who spent months on a secret phone arranging for hired gunmen to shoot her parents in their own basement while she waited upstairs, tied to a banister, pretending to be a victim. Case 8. Jennifer Pan. On the night of November 8, 2010, police in Markham, Ontario, Canada, responded to a call from a home on a quiet residential street in the Unionville area of the city. The caller reported a home invasion. When officers arrived, they found Han Pan on the front lawn, shot in the face, barely alive. Inside the house, in the basement, they found Bik Ha Pan. She had been shot multiple times. She died of her injuries. Upstairs, tied to a banister with a shoelace, they found the couple's 24-year-old daughter Jennifer. She was unharmed. She told police that 3 men had broken into the home, forced her parents to the basement at gunpoint, and shot them both. She said the men had left her alive. Bik Ha Pan was 53 years old. Han Pan was 57. They had come to Canada as refugees from Vietnam, built a life from nothing, and spent decades working at an auto parts manufacturer called Magna International in Aurora, Ontario. Han was a tool and die maker. Bik made car parts. By 2004, they had saved enough to buy a house in Markham, a city in the Greater Toronto area with a large East Asian community. They had 2 children, Jennifer, born in 1986, and Felix, born in 1989. In December 2014, Jennifer Pan was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of her mother and attempted murder in the attack on her father. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Her co-conspirators received the same sentence. Her father, Han Pan, who survived being shot in the face, testified against her at trial. The investigation that led to Jennifer's arrest began with a single observation Han Pan made when he woke from his coma. He told police that on the night of the attack, he had seen his daughter Jennifer whispering to one of the gunmen in a soft and friendly way, like a friend. That detail, combined with a growing list of inconsistencies in the investigation, turned Jennifer from a grieving survivor into the prime suspect within 2 weeks of the attack. What investigators uncovered when they looked into Jennifer Pan's life was a fabrication so extensive and so sustained that it is difficult to fully absorb. For nearly a decade, Jennifer had been lying to her parents about almost everything. Han and Bik Pan had enormous expectations for their daughter. They wanted her to become a doctor. Jennifer was a strong student through much of her schooling and showed early promise. She was also a gifted figure skater who trained seriously as a child, though an injury ended that path. The pressure in the Pan household was significant. Han in particular was described as strict and demanding, the rule maker of the family. Bik was closer to Jennifer and more emotionally accessible, though she supported her husband's approach to raising their children. The problems began when Jennifer started struggling academically in high school. Rather than tell her parents she was failing, she started forging documents. She forged report cards to show grades she had not earned. When she did not graduate from high school, she told her parents she had. She then told them she had been accepted to the University of Toronto to study pharmacy. She was not. For years, Jennifer left the house each morning as though going to class, and came home each evening as though she had been studying. She created fake university transcripts. She created fake diplomas. She manufactured pay stubs from a job at Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto that she did not have. She told her parents she was volunteering there. She told them she was working at a pharmacy. None of it was true. During those same years, Jennifer had been in a relationship with a young man named Daniel Wong. Wong had been her high school boyfriend. Her parents did not approve of him. They found out he was involved in drug dealing and told Jennifer to end the relationship. She did not. She hid the relationship for years, telling her parents she was living with a friend when she was actually spending time with Wong. The relationship was the emotional center of Jennifer's hidden life. She kept it secret for approximately 7 years. When Han and Bick finally discovered the full extent of the lies, the fake degrees, the fake jobs, the fake life, everything collapsed at once. They forced Jennifer to end the relationship with Wong and move back home under strict conditions. She was given a curfew, her movements were monitored. The future she had constructed in her parents' minds and the parallel secret life she had actually been living both disappeared at the same time. Jennifer later told police, in a recorded interview that was played at trial, that she had felt like a failure. She said she could not live up to her parents' expectations and had no way out. She said she had arranged for the hitmen to kill herself, not her parents, that she had wanted to die. Prosecutors did not accept that account, and the evidence did not support it. What the evidence showed was a months-long planning process conducted through a phone that investigators called the murder phone, a device Jennifer used specifically to coordinate the attack. The SIM card from that phone was never found. Jennifer arranged to pay $10,000 for the killing of her parents. The money was to come from her inheritance after they were dead. She communicated with Wong, who organized the men who would carry out the attack. 2 of those men, Lenford Crawford and David Milvaganam, entered the Pan home on the night of November 8, 2010, along with a third man who was never identified. Jennifer unlocked the front door before going to bed that night to make entry easier. She then went upstairs. The men entered, forced Han and Bick to the basement and shot both of them. Han was shot in the face and in the shoulder area. Bick was shot multiple times and died. Jennifer was found upstairs, tied to the banister with a shoelace. The binding of her wrists was loose enough that it appeared she had secured it herself. The investigation moved quickly once Han woke from his coma and described seeing Jennifer with the gunmen. Police reviewed Jennifer's phone records and found the communications connecting her to Wong and through him to the men he had recruited. Financial records showed the payment arrangements. Text messages from Jennifer's phone showed her discussing the plan in the months before the attack. In one exchange, Wong referenced having lined up someone he called Homeboy. Jennifer's responses showed she was aware of and directing the planning. Jennifer was arrested on November 22, 2010, during her 3rd interview with police. Detective William Goetz, the lead investigator, told Jennifer during that interview that he knew everything. He used a technique that is legal under Canadian law. He told her he had computer software that could detect lies in statements and that satellite technology existed to track movements inside buildings. None of that was true, but Canadian law permits police to make false claims to suspects during interrogations. Under that pressure, Jennifer began to crack. She admitted she had hired people to come to the house. She claimed the plan had been to kill herself, not her parents. She was arrested that night. Wong and the gunman were arrested in the months that followed. The trial began in 2014. Jennifer, Wong, Crawford and Milvaganam were tried together. The prosecution presented the phone records, the text messages, the financial evidence, and Han Pan's testimony about seeing his daughter whispering to one of the attackers. They also presented Jennifer's own recorded statements to police. The defense for Jennifer argued that the plan had been to kill Jennifer herself, not her parents, and that the attack had gone wrong. They pointed to Jennifer's history of depression and self-harm and suggested she had been in a state of psychological collapse when she arranged whatever she had arranged. The jury rejected that argument entirely. On December 13, 2014, all 4 accused were found guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Jennifer fainted in the courtroom when she heard the verdict read. On January 23, 2015, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, plus a concurrent life sentence for the attempted murder of her father. Her co-accused received identical sentences. Han Pan's written statement was read into the record at sentencing. He said that when he lost his wife, he lost his daughter at the same time. He said he hoped Jennifer would think about what had happened to their family and could someday become a good and honest person. The case went through significant legal proceedings in the years that followed. In May 2023, the Ontario Court of Appeal ordered a new trial on the first-degree murder charge related to Bic Pan's death, finding that the trial judge had not properly instructed the jury on the possibility of second-degree murder or manslaughter verdicts in that specific charge. The Supreme Court of Canada confirmed that order in April 2025. The attempted murder conviction relating to Han Pan was upheld and remains in place, meaning Jennifer has continued serving a life sentence throughout the appeals process. In March 2026, Jennifer Pan pleaded guilty to manslaughter in connection with her mother's death as part of the resolution of the retrial. She received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Her attempted murder conviction for the attack on her father remains, and she continues to be incarcerated at the Grand Valley Institution for Women in Kitchener, Ontario. The Netflix documentary What Jennifer Did, released in April 2024, brought widespread international attention to the case for a new audience. It drew heavily on police interview footage and the investigative work documented by crime reporter Jeremy Grimaldi, who wrote a book about the case called A Daughter's Deadly Deception. Bic Pan had come to Canada with nothing. She and her husband had worked factory jobs for decades to buy a house and give their children a future. She organised both funerals in the family, her own father's and then her own, though she did not know that second one was coming. Jennifer had asked to organise both because it was a Chinese custom for older family members to have their funerals first. Bic had trusted her daughter with that responsibility. Jennifer was in custody for her mother's murder by the time that funeral was held. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case moves away from murder plots and hired killers entirely and into something rawer. A 15-year-old girl in rural Missouri who dug a grave in the woods behind her neighborhood several days before she needed it, then sent her little sister to bring a 9-year-old child into those woods because she wanted to know what killing someone felt like. Case 9. Alyssa Bustamante. On the evening of October 21, 2009, 9-year-old Elizabeth K. Alton left her home in St. Martins, Missouri, to go play with a neighbor. She lived 4 houses down from a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa Bustamante. Elizabeth had been invited by Alyssa's younger sister. Elizabeth walked toward the woods behind the neighborhood and did not come home. Her family reported her missing that night. For 2 days, hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement officers searched for her in cold temperatures and rain. They found nothing. On October 23, 2009, Alyssa Bustamante led police to a shallow grave in the woods, approximately half a mile from her house. Elizabeth Alton was inside it, covered with a blanket of leaves. She had been strangled, stabbed 8 times in the chest, and her throat had been cut. She was 9 years old. Alyssa Bustamante told police she had killed Elizabeth because she wanted to know what it felt like. In January 2012, Alyssa pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus a consecutive 30-year sentence for the armed criminal action charge. Under Missouri guidelines, she must serve a minimum of 35 years and 5 months before her first parole hearing. Her earliest possible release is in 2059, when she will be 65 years old. She was denied parole at a July 2024 hearing. Her next hearing is scheduled for 2029. Elizabeth Alton was born on December 15, 1999, to a family in St. Martins, a small rural community west of Jefferson City in central Missouri. She was 9 years old and in elementary school. She lived close enough to Alyssa that the two families existed in the same immediate neighborhood. Elizabeth had no conflict with Alyssa. She had not done anything to Alyssa. She was not a target for any reason that had anything to do with her own actions or her own life. She was simply a child who lived nearby, and Alyssa Bustamante had decided she wanted to kill someone, and Elizabeth was accessible. Alyssa Bustamante was born in 1994. Her mother Michelle had addiction problems, and her father Caesar was serving time in prison for assault charges. In 2002, when Alyssa was around 8 years old, her grandparents Gary and Karen Brooke took legal custody of her and her 3 younger siblings. By most external accounts, her grandparents provided a stable home. They cared for the children and tried to give them a normal upbringing, but Alyssa was struggling in ways that were visible to people around her from at least 2007. That year, when she was 13, she was hospitalized after a suicide attempt. She began seeing mental health professionals. She was prescribed the antidepressant Prozac, though her dosage fluctuated across the period leading up to the murder, and her defense attorneys later argued this instability contributed to her psychological state. Mental health professionals who evaluated her diagnosed her with major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. On her YouTube profile, Alyssa listed her hobbies. One of them was cutting, another was killing people. She posted a photograph of herself online with fake blood around her lips, pointing her fingers at her head in the shape of a gun. These were visible, public signals that something was seriously wrong. In the period leading up to October 21, 2009, no intervention stopped what was coming. In the days before the murder, Alyssa dug 2 shallow graves in the woods behind the neighborhood. She dug them in advance. She chose the location. She prepared the site. This detail was presented at her sentencing as among the most significant evidence that what happened on October 21st was not impulsive. She had planned it. She had made physical preparations for it. Then she waited for the right moment to use what she had built. On the evening of October 21st, Alyssa sent her younger sister to Elizabeth Alton's house with an invitation to come and hang out. Her sister did not know what Alyssa was planning. Elizabeth accepted and walked toward the woods with Alyssa's sister. When they arrived, Alyssa sent her sister away and took Elizabeth into the forest alone. Once they were out of sight, Alyssa strangled Elizabeth. She then stabbed her 8 times in the chest and cut her throat. She put Elizabeth's body in one of the graves she had dug and covered it with leaves. After the killing, Alyssa went home. Her family reported nothing unusual about her behavior that evening. Elizabeth's family reported her missing and the search began. For 2 days, Alyssa Bustamante was part of the community that was searching for Elizabeth Alton, or at least aware of that search going on around her. She knew where Elizabeth was. She had put her there. On October 23, 2009, she confessed to police and led them to the grave. A personal journal was found in Alyssa's bedroom during the investigation. Inside it was an entry dated October 21, 2009. Forensic investigators could initially make out only 2 words: slit and throat. The full entry was later recovered, though Alyssa had attempted to scribble parts of it out. The entry read, in her own words, "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. Now they're dead. I don't know how to feel at them. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the oh my god I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kinda nervous and shaky though right now. K, I gotta go to church now, lol." That journal entry was read aloud in court by a handwriting expert during Alyssa's sentencing hearing. Elizabeth Alton's mother, Patty Price, sat in the courtroom and listened to it. Alyssa was initially charged with first-degree murder. Under Missouri law at the time, a first-degree murder conviction carried a mandatory sentence of life without the possibility of parole. Because Alyssa was a juvenile, her attorneys challenged the constitutionality of that mandatory sentence. In January 2012, 3 weeks before her trial was set to begin, the prosecutor offered to reduce the charge to second-degree murder and armed criminal action if Alyssa would plead guilty and allow the judge to determine the sentence. Alyssa accepted. She pleaded guilty on January 10, 2012. The sentencing hearing took place over 2 days in February 2012. It was her 18th birthday month. Witnesses on both sides testified. The prosecution called Missouri State Highway Patrol Sergeant David Rice, who had been present when Alyssa confessed. He testified that she had told him directly she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Prosecutors also cited the pre-dug graves as evidence of deliberate planning and the journal entry as evidence of Alyssa's state of mind during and after the killing. The defense called mental health professionals who testified about Alyssa's diagnoses, major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder, and about the impact of the fluctuating Prozac dosage she had been on in the period leading up to the murder. Defense attorneys Don Catlett and Charles Morland argued for a sentence less than life, pointing to Alyssa's traumatic background, her age, and her mental health history. They described her as a severely disturbed child who had been failed by the systems that should have helped her before she hurt herself or someone else. Prosecutor Mark Richardson rejected that framing entirely. He told the court that Alyssa Bustamante had committed an adult-like crime and deserved an adult-like punishment. He asked the judge to sentence her to life with the possibility of parole on the murder charge and 71 years on the armed criminal action charge. 71 years because that was how many years Elizabeth Alton had been robbed of. He wanted Alyssa to have to explain herself at every parole hearing for the rest of her life. Cole County presiding judge Patricia Joyce sentenced Alyssa to life in prison with the possibility of parole for the second-degree murder conviction and a consecutive 30-year sentence for armed criminal action. The sentences run one after the other, not at the same time. Under Missouri guidelines, she must serve at least 85% of the life sentence, defined as 30 years under state statute, and at least 33% of the 30-year armed criminal action sentence before she is eligible for parole on either charge. That works out to a minimum of 35 years, 5 months and 3 days, with credit for the time she had already spent in the Cole County Jail, just over 2 years. Before the sentence was handed down, Alyssa addressed Elizabeth Alton's family in court. She said she just wanted them to know she was really sorry for everything. She said she knew words could never be enough and could never describe how horrible she felt. She said if she could give her life to bring Elizabeth back, she would. Patty Price, Elizabeth's mother, sat between her son Anthony and daughter Stephanie and stared at Alyssa as she spoke. Alyssa Bustamante filed appeals in the years that followed. In 2013, she attempted to have her guilty plea overturned, arguing that her attorneys had given her ineffective counsel by not waiting to see how a pending United States Supreme Court case, Miller v. Alabama, would affect mandatory juvenile sentencing before advising her to take the plea deal. In June 2012, several months after Alyssa had already pleaded guilty, the Supreme Court ruled in Miller that mandatory life without parole sentences for juvenile homicide offenders violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Alyssa argued that if her attorneys had known that ruling was coming, they would not have advised her to plead guilty to avoid it. The Missouri Court of Appeals denied that argument in 2015, finding no clear error in the lower court's conclusions. In July 2024, Alyssa Bustamante appeared before Missouri's parole board. She was 30 years old. The hearing was made possible by Senate Bill 26, a Missouri law designed to give juvenile offenders earlier access to parole hearings. The bill had been written to exclude those convicted of first-degree murder, but Alyssa had pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, which meant she qualified. The parole board denied her release. A subsequent amendment to Missouri law, Senate Bill 754, was intended to close that gap and block those convicted of second-degree murder from the same early access. Governor Mike Parson did not sign Senate Bill 754 before the 2024 hearing took place. Alyssa was denied parole regardless. Her next scheduled hearing is in 2029. Even if she is eventually granted parole on her life sentence, she must still serve the consecutive 30-year sentence for armed criminal action before she is free. She is currently imprisoned at the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Chillicothe, Missouri. Elizabeth K. Alton was 9 years old. She had done nothing to Alyssa Bustamante. She had no conflict with her, no history with her, no reason in the world to fear her. She walked into the woods because a neighbor's younger sister asked her to come hang out. The last thing she experienced in her life was being strangled, stabbed, and having her throat cut by a teenage girl who described it in her diary as pretty enjoyable. Hundreds of people searched for Elizabeth in the cold and rain for 2 days. The person who knew exactly where she was the entire time was at home, having gone to church the same night she killed her. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Case 10. Suzanne von Richthofen. On the night of October 31, 2002, in the upscale Brooklyn neighborhood of Sao Paulo, Brazil, 18-year-old Suzanne von Richthofen put her 15-year-old brother Andreas in a car, drove him to an internet cafe, and left him there to spend the night playing video games with friends. Then she drove back to the family home, walked inside, confirmed her parents were asleep in their bedroom, switched off the burglar alarm, turned off the security cameras, and opened the electric gate for her boyfriend Daniel Kravinhos and his older brother Christian. She then went downstairs and sat on the living room couch. She waited there while Daniel and Christian went upstairs, walked into her parents' bedroom, and beat Manfred and Marisia von Richthofen to death with iron bars as they slept. When Marisia showed signs of life after the initial blows, the brothers strangled her with a towel and suffocated her with a plastic bag. When it was over, Suzanne helped them scatter papers across the library and pocket some cash to make the house look like it had been robbed. Then Suzanne and Daniel drove to a motel for the night. Christian went to a fast food restaurant. The following morning, Suzanne collected Andreas from the internet cafe, drove him home, and the two of them walked in and pretended to discover their parents' bodies. They called the police. Suzanne answered every question calmly. The next day, she was seen swimming in the family pool with Daniel. Several days later, just hours after her parents were buried, she celebrated her 19th birthday with friends. 9 days after the murders, investigators arrested all three. Suzanne confessed. In July 2006, a Sao Paulo jury convicted her of double homicide and sentenced her to 39 years and 6 months in prison. She was released on parole in January 2023 after serving approximately 20 years. She has since had a child, changed her legal name, and is living freely in Brazil. Manfred Albert von Richthofen was a German-born engineer who had built one of the most respected professional careers in Sao Paulo. He served as director of Dursa, the state-owned company responsible for managing Sao Paulo's highway system, and was the chief engineer on the Mario Covas Beltway project, one of the most significant infrastructure developments in the city's history. He was 49 years old when he died. His wife Marisia was a psychiatrist of Brazilian and Lebanese descent, 50 years old, well regarded in her field. The family lived behind an electric gate in Brooklyn, one of Sao Paulo's most affluent neighbourhoods. Their declared net worth stood at approximately 5.5 million reais. Investigators also suspected, though never conclusively proved, that Manfred had opened Swiss bank accounts in Suzanne's name when she turned 18 in November 2001, potentially containing tens of millions of reais linked to the highway project budget, which had ballooned from an original estimate of around $340 million to over $1 billion. Suzanne and Andreas had been given everything: elite private schools, multiple languages, a home in one of Brazil's wealthiest neighbourhoods. Suzanne was enrolled in law at the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo. She spoke 3 languages. Neighbours described the family as discreet, intellectual, and close. From the outside, the von Richthofens were exactly what they appeared to be. The relationship with Daniel Kravinhos began in 1999, when Suzanne was 15 and Daniel was 18. Suzanne's younger brother Andreas had met Daniel through a shared interest in model planes. Suzanne noticed the older boy and introduced herself. Daniel came from a working-class background, was not interested in studying or working, used marijuana daily, and was the opposite in almost every measurable way from the world Suzanne had grown up in. That contrast was part of the attraction. Suzanne began sneaking out to see him, hiding the relationship from her parents. Daniel gave her drugs and drew her further into a lifestyle that clashed with everything the von Richthofen household stood for. By the time her parents found out about the relationship and tried to end it, Suzanne had already been hiding it for years and had no intention of giving it up. Manfred and Marisia initially tolerated the relationship, hoping it would pass. It did not. When they discovered Daniel had moved into the family home while they were on vacation in July 2002, they confronted Suzanne directly. She suggested they buy her a flat so she and Daniel could live together independently. Manfred refused. He told her she could do whatever she liked, but only if she earned her own money. When they continued to object to the relationship, Suzanne and Daniel began discussing something else entirely. By October 2002, the plan was concrete. The Kravinhos brothers sourced iron bars. Christian had connections to a scaffolding operation. Suzanne provided the access. She knew the alarm codes, the camera system, the layout of the house, and the routines of everyone inside it. Earlier in 2002, the group had even considered using a firearm, but rejected the idea because of the noise. The blunt force approach was quieter. The planning extended over several months. Suzanne and Daniel discussed it in private, in messages, and with Christian, who agreed to help. On the night they chose, Halloween, Suzanne first made sure her brother was safely removed from the house and would have an alibi that kept him away from what was coming. Inside the parents' bedroom, the attack was prolonged and brutal. Manfred and Mauricia were beaten with iron bars as they slept. When Mauricia was still alive after the initial assault, she was strangled with a towel and suffocated with a plastic bag. Forensic reconstruction of the scene showed both parents had been struck multiple times. The blood-stained iron bars were recovered after investigators found they had been washed in the backyard swimming pool, a detail that confirmed insider knowledge of the property. The investigators also found a hidden compartment inside the victim's wardrobe containing valuables that had not been taken by the supposed burglars, something no real intruder would have known to ignore. Police were skeptical of the robbery narrative from the beginning. The alarm system had been switched off from inside. The security cameras had been deactivated. The papers scattered in the library were spread too evenly, too deliberately, to look like the work of someone frantically searching for valuables. And then there was Suzanne's behaviour. The pool the next morning, the birthday party after the funeral, the complete absence of anything resembling genuine distress. Investigators placed all three suspects under surveillance. The break came 9 days after the murders, when Christian Krevinhos bought a motorcycle and paid for it in high-denomination US dollar bills. The bills were traced back to the von Richthofen home. On November 9, 2002, Christian was arrested, then Daniel, then Suzanne. All three confessed to their roles in the murders. Suzanne was held initially and then, in a decision that drew significant public controversy, was released in May 2005 by a Supreme Federal Court ruling on a habeas corpus petition. She awaited trial under house arrest for over a year. The trial began on July 17, 2006, at the Barafunda Criminal Forum in São Paulo. It lasted 5 days. The courtroom held more than 200 spectators and was packed throughout. At trial, each defendant tried to shift the primary blame onto the others. Suzanne's defense argued she had been manipulated by Daniel, that she was psychologically dependent on him, that he had threatened to leave her if she did not help him get rid of her parents, and that she had no motive of her own. Daniel's defense argued the opposite, that Suzanne had orchestrated everything, that she had told him her father was abusive, and that he had been drawn in by her. Christian's defense attempted to portray him as a reluctant participant who had tried to talk them out of it. None of those accounts satisfied the prosecution. Chief Prosecutor Roberto Tardelli described Suzanne as the mastermind and told the jury that all three had acted in cold-blooded fashion, plotting and carrying out the murders out of greed. He characterized the crime as motivated by the couple's desire to access the von Richthofen estate and eliminate the only obstacle standing between them and it. He sought 50 years for each defendant. The jury convicted all three. Judge Alberto Anderson Filho delivered the sentences in the early hours of July 22, 2006. Suzanne and Daniel each received 39 years and 6 months. Christian received 38 years and 6 months. The murders were classified as triply aggravated for the cruel methods used, for the fact that the victims had no opportunity to defend themselves, and for what the court described as morally sordid motives. Under Brazilian law, no person can be imprisoned for more than 30 years, regardless of the sentence handed down. Suzanne received a 1-year reduction because she was under 21 at the time of the crime. She served her sentence at the Penitenciaria Feminina Santa Maria Eufrasia Pelletier in Tremembe, São Paulo. In 2015, she transitioned to a semi-open regime. On January 11, 2023, after serving approximately 20 years, she was granted progression to an open regime and released on parole. The Brazilian court also ruled in February 2011 that Suzanne was unworthy to receive any inheritance from her parents' estate, as she had been convicted of their murder. She attempted to seek alimony from the estate. That request was also denied. In October 2014, Suzanne appeared before a court to formally renounce her entire inheritance in favour of her brother Andreas. She and Andreas had not seen each other since the 2006 trial. Following her release in January 2023, Suzanne initially moved to a rural area of São Paulo state before relocating to the town of Bragança Paulista. Within weeks of her release, she announced she was opening an online store, which generated immediate and fierce public backlash in Brazil. In December 2023, she legally changed her name to Suzanne Louise Magnani Muniz. In 2023, she became pregnant. Her son was born in January 2024. She is currently living in Bragança Paulista with her partner, a doctor named Felipe Zacchini Muniz. Daniel Cravinhos was also released to an open regime several years before Suzanne and has largely kept a low profile, reportedly working in aero modelling and motorcycle customization. Christian Cravinhos had a more troubled post-conviction history. He was returned to a closed prison regime in 2017 after being arrested for attempting to bribe police officers during a domestic dispute. Manfred von Richthofen was 49 years old. Mauricia was 50. They were beaten to death in their bed on Halloween night by their daughter's boyfriend and his brother, while their daughter sat downstairs on the couch and waited for it to be over. The woman who organised that night spent 20 years in prison, changed her name, had a child, and is walking free in Brazil. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.